Good day and welcome to Africa Connect, where we try to converse on different stories across the continent. My name is Dalmanyari and I'll be your co-pilot today on Everything African. Thank you for joining us and we hope you make us your regular staple. Joining me today is Robert Kigongo, a Sustainable Development Analyst based in Uganda. Robert, welcome.
Thank you. Happy New Year to our listeners
Happy
and
New
to
Year.
you, my host.
Happy New Year indeed. So the last time you were here, we had discussed the democratic textures within Uganda and had quite the talk. We meet again this time around, and USA is the talk of the town. A two-worded mantra has been ringing in our ears since the USA elections: America first. So it's a buzzword for everyone who understands American politics. So one of the first things that the US president has done since his inception is aim at reevaluating and realigning foreign aid priorities. This has sent shockwaves across the world, particularly for those within the humanitarian sector. Could you kindly unpack that and what possibly the USAID suspension possibly looks like, or the kinds of impacts it has for Uganda particularly?
Thank you. One and foremost, America and Uganda's relationship is 61 years old since its independence, but also unpacking the America's response from our perspective.
Mhm.
America first is the issue. You have to look back at the two presidential candidates that have just been contesting for the highest seat in Washington. That's Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Trump emerged as the winner, but he had his manifesto with the key 7 priorities. So those 7 priorities are migration policy, which is very, very key. Moving on economy, tax and tariffs, whereby he's planning to end inflation, sweeping tax cuts, tips tax-free, abolishing on social security payments, and, of course, shaving the corporation tax. Among his manifesto, because he is the sitting president of the United States, he pledged to cut climate regulations, end the war in Ukraine, to say no to abortion, pardon some January 6 rioters, and then also sack special counsel Jack Smith. Trump's slogan relies on or goes as promise made, promise delivered. So what Trump is delivering now, before we actually crucify him, is his manifesto. This calls for reforms in the fiscal policy of the United States. It calls for frugality, henceforth cutting foreign aid, which is one of the most wasteful expenditures to the US budget. We must be cognizant of the fact that the US also has its own issues. The people of the United States are heavily taxed. So Trump is looking at America first. So he is delivering what he promised. However, in the due course, Uganda has been among the countries that have been affected. We all know that US invests $1 billion in Uganda. Part of this money goes in very different sectors: health sector, agriculture sector, energy sector, security, among others. But the largest budget goes to the health sector. That includes the prevention of HIV, or making sure that we achieve the UN targets, the 95 targets of eradicating HIV by the year 2030. So that's how heavily Uganda has been affected by the cuts, plus other issues like loss of jobs, among others. But we must be very kind to Trump that he is implementing his manifesto. and we are not taxpayers we don't pay our taxes to the government of the United States. We pay our taxes to the states in Africa. I pay my tax to the Uganda state. You pay your tax to the South African Zim states. So
Mm.
we must be cognizant of these facts that is implementing his manifesto.
No, I definitely understand you on that point. But now I think one of the main issues that we've been saying, going around, particularly when it comes to civil society organizations, is this plea or rather this cry as to what then happens to these vulnerable populations that ideally we're benefiting from this, foreign aid. What then happens to them? Are their countries even able to then sustain them? Because with some
Ah,
economies, some
yes,
African economies, it's not necessarily the way to go around it.
part of the $1 billion that the American government invests in Uganda goes to partly goes to 100 plus civil
Mhm,
societies that they are supporting in health. They are supporting in advancing democracy. They are supporting in advancing food security. They are also supporting malaria initiatives. They are supporting a number of efforts in education. So part of this money goes to the civil societies. And civil societies are employing quite a number of people. But I just
mhm,
want to look at the effect of Trump's stop aid to just
mhm,
the health sector. Nearly 1.4 million Ugandans have been receiving life-saving ARVs through PEPFAR.
mhm.
That is 90% of the HIV Ugandans, and over 1.2 million have achieved viral suppression that prevents spreading of the virus. So these Ugandans are going to be affected. There have been some initiatives. Of course, civil societies have come out to air their voice, how they have been affected by Trump's. So, as we talk right now, there's been some relief. They are trying to reach an understanding.
Mhm,
Therefore, treatment of HIV patients will continue at least for 6 months.
mhm.
So many of the clients have been told to pick their ARVs to sustain them through. But that's how deeply they've been infected. But the loss of jobs is also very critical. We're going to have people
Definitely.
going into depression. So we must be, as civil societies, we must be very, very cognizant that we need to have a backup plan besides just donor resources.
Mm,
Because most Ugandan civil societies have been entirely depending on donor funds. But also, we must be very mindful that the government of Uganda
mhm,
or our African governments have the cardinal duty to meet the obligations of supporting the sectors that the US has been supporting. So it's a wake up call
mm.
to African governments, not just the Ugandan government, to reclaim their mandate of taking care of the life of their people that they signed a social contract with. That includes people who are working in civil societies, that includes the HIV victims, that includes the refugees that the Americans have been supporting in the camps, that includes the Ugandans who are working in various UN agencies that have been stopped due to the executive order.
Mhm. So touching back, you mentioned the whole idea of depending on international donors. So what would be your take or rather advice, particularly for those CSOs who possibly still have that kind of mentality of depending on international donors or dollar-pegged kind of like funding?
As someone who has worked with the civil society, there are two ways how a civil society can survive, or three ways. One is through fundraising for resources domestically.
Mm-hmm,
Two is through program income. Three is through donor aid.
mm-hmm,
I worked with an HIV organization called the AIDS Information Center, and we had an IP program, a program income, but it was through charging people who had come to do HIV testing. But it was not sustainable to the organization. So we tried fundraising. We could barely not raise enough. Our board of trustees during the AGM used to do some fundraising, but you you can't even raise quarter of the budget of the organization. So it's at our discretion to depend on donor resources. But now this is a wake-up call to think of other alternatives. But I think government should also chip in and support the civil societies, because civil societies are only complementing the work of the government.
Yeah.
Supporting the HIV patients, supporting refugees, supporting communities in various initiatives like clean water, accessibility to clean water, accessibility to clean energy. These are cardinal duties of the government. So it's upon the government to support these civil societies, but also it's a reminder to us, the citizens, that we must hold our government accountable. Because we pay taxes. What do these taxes do? Do they end up in mansions? Do they end up in foreign accounts? Do they end up in very exorbitant expenditures? Here we have a head of state who buys a motorcade, a new motorcade, at around $1 billion almost after 6 months. That money can be used to support other CSOs and other government initiatives, the social uplifting programs. So now it's a wake-up call for us to know America has its own issues. We also have our own issues. So we shouldn't put our burden to the taxpayer in the USA. One great thinker said foreign aid is taxes collected from poor citizens of a rich nation to rich citizens of a poor country. And he was right.
That's very profound.
So it's a wake-up call for civil societies, but also for government.
I think the other thing to also look out for, particularly touching back on the point where you mentioned that when it comes to CSO activities, they're basically just complementing government initiatives. It's also quite important that even though it is a matter of looking back at our own national governments, even as they do try to be that buffer and also chip in when it comes to CSO activities, to also be very mindful that with most of the CSOs, they are non-profit, non-governmental organizations. And ideally, with including the government, at times may mean having to change certain aspects of how they are structured or how they go about their activities. So it's also something that CSOs themselves would also need to be mindful of, that in as much as it can be a matter of looking back to our own governments within the states, we should also be on the lookout as to what will those governments also need in return or want to put in place as being a rule or being something to comply with.
First and foremost, we must also be kind to the CSOs, the environment they operate in. Yes, in first place. But also, as I've mentioned earlier, that it's a cardinal role of the government. You've clearly mentioned that government has to change its priorities. For example, here in Uganda, the health ministry has called for an urgent meeting that they will be trying their best to support the gaps that the US government has left. They will be approaching the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance is also responding that it will go to the Revenue Authority so that it can collect more money. So this calls for an expansion of our tax base collection, ending corruption, changing priorities, but also proper strategic planning and holistic strategic planning that captures key interventions like health. Health doesn't wait. So I believe the governments will revise their strategic work plans, their national development plans, so that they can address these gaps that can't wait. Like, for example, you can't let 1.4 million Ugandans to die. These are your own citizens. These are your taxpayers. These are your productive citizens. So you must find a solution. And the solution is priorities. Changing your priorities. There is a lot of wasteful expenditure within the public administration sector, especially back home here. You have almost 560 members of parliament. You have almost 400 presidential advisors who are not needed, who are actually advised. So these are things that waste our taxpayers' money. And that money needs to be channeled back to the most important sectors like health, agriculture, and energy sector that have been badly affected by the new executive orders of Donald Trump.
No, definitely do agree. So, any words that you could leave for our dear citizens once again when in line or talking about this issue?
When I saw those executive orders, I was happy. Ask me why.
Why?
There is a syndrome of I don't care about politics. I don't care about democratic processes. But this has been a revelation that politics determines every essence of life in society today. A single signature of Donald Trump was able to stop someone from working in Uganda. A single signature put someone, an HIV patient, into serious worries. I saw a government calling for urgent meetings between the country diplomat of US and UK. I saw my colleagues in civil society changing strategy from America to European Union. But the dependency syndrome must come to an end. We must hold our governments accountable for the taxes that we pay. African countries are not poor. We have the money, but it's misused by the greedy leaders that we elect. And we are also responsible for those greedy leaders because they are voted by us. They are still in power because of us. So it's time to recognize that we must participate in democratic processes. If it's time for elections, please go and vote. If it's time to participate in electoral campaigns, please participate. If there is an opportunity to participate in civic spaces, please do participate in civic spaces. Please, let's shape public discourse. That's how we can hold our government accountable to the taxes that we pay so that they can be well utilized for those key things that concern us like health, agriculture, energy, and good governance.
Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us today. And we hope our listeners also take yield of all that you have mentioned and do take it seriously to be that democratic citizen who exercises that democratic right. Thank you so much once again, and goodbye.